Do you know of a stellar leader or an outstanding organization that deserves a proper shout-out? Nominate them for IBJ's awards. From 40 in their 40s and Women of Influence to Nonprofit and Healthcare Excellence Awards, we're celebrating rising stars, seasoned leaders, and organizations making a difference. Discover which programs are accepting nominations now at ibj.com/nominate.
Off the Record with the Indiana 250 is presented by Prolific. When what worked stops working, I point purpose-driven leaders to Prolific, the growth firm. They turn plans into results with full-service marketing and strategy focused on outcomes, not vanity metrics. Head to prolifichq.com to learn more.
The only thing you've got in life is your word. You never jeopardize your integrity. And I always say to people, if your word is good, nothing else matters. And if your word is not good, nothing else matters.
Welcome to Off the Record, a podcast featuring leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, which publishes the Indiana 250, a list of the most influential business people in Indiana. Welcome to Off the Record, a podcast featuring leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, which publishes the Indiana 250, a list of the most influential business people in the state. Today, I'm joined by Jeff Smulyan, founder and CEO of Emmis Communications, the Indianapolis-based media company, which he grew into one of the nation's largest media companies. Jeff grew up in Indianapolis and graduated from North Central High School before earning his bachelor's in history and telecommunications from the University of Southern California. He went on to earn a law degree from the USC School of Law. And in 1980, Jeff founded Emmis Communications and began to acquire stations across the country over the course of the next decade plus. Under his leadership, Emmis acquired and launched some of the most recognizable radio brands in the country, including Power 106 in LA, Hot 97 in New York, Q101 in Chicago, and KSHE in St. Louis. Beyond radio, Emmis expanded into television and at one point owned 15 stations across the country, and also built a robust publishing arm with city and regional magazines, including the Indianapolis Monthly and the Texas Monthly. Emmis also drove innovation in tech and mobile media, creating initiatives like Next Radio app and other digital platforms that pushed radio into the smartphone era. In more recent times, Emmis has moved into various new ventures after selling most of its media assets. In 1989, Jeff stepped into professional sports ownership, leading a group of investors that purchased the Seattle Mariners baseball team. He's been recognized as a giant of broadcasting by the Library of American Broadcasting. He was inducted into the Broadcasting and Cable Hall of Fame and the Indiana Business Hall of Fame. In 2017, received the Lowry Mays Excellence in Broadcasting Award from the Broadcasters Foundation of America, one of the industry's highest honors. He also is a recipient of IBJ's Michael A. Carroll Award for Civic Leadership and was named an Indiana Living Legend by the Indiana Historical Society. Jeff has long been active and continues to be active in civic and philanthropic efforts in Indianapolis, supporting education, the arts, and numerous community initiatives. In 2022, at the urging of his daughter, he wrote his memoirs entitled Never Ride a Rollercoaster Upside Down, a behind-the-scenes account of his life as a risk-taking entrepreneur. It's a candid look at building Emmis, navigating disruption, and the lessons he's learned about risk, resilience, and reinvention. Jeff, welcome to the Indiana 250 podcast. Really appreciate you joining me today.
Nate, pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
Well, I always like starting at the beginning with my podcast guests and talking about, where you grew up, what it was like growing up. And of course, you grew up in Indianapolis, but love for you to talk a little bit about growing up in Indy and how you decided, maybe if you did early on, to think about a career in entrepreneurship.
It's funny. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My father was an entrepreneur. My grandfathers were entrepreneurs. And it was just always sort of what I wanted to do. At an early age, I loved the radio business. And I said, this is what I want to do. And somebody said, if you hadn't done it, what would you have done? I said, I probably would have done talk shows because I like doing that.
Yeah.
But I always loved it. And I went to school and majored in history and telecom. And then when it came time to graduate, I was going to get a master's at Stanford in telecommunications. And somebody said, you really ought to go to law school, get a law degree, study broadcast law. And then when you come out to be an entrepreneur, you know what you're doing. And I always laughed, and I said, if I got that advice today, 100 out of 100 people would say, get an MBA. But in those days, like, nah, I don't get an MBA. And I'm glad I did it. Great education. I've always kidded. I've been on inactive status in the State Bar of Indiana for 45 years.
Yeah.
If I ever went on active status, they would just bar me the same day. Never could be a lawyer. But I love what I do, and it was a great education, and it really taught me how to understand competing resources and allocation risks, and never wouldn't trade it for a minute.
And so did you always, growing up in Indy, were you thinking about leaving the state for college? Of course, you went to USC. How did that get on your radar screen?
I just thought California in the 60s was like the coolest place of all time.
Yeah.
And I thought, I had a cousin who went to USC, and I thought, it was really cool. I can still remember watching the USC Rose Bowl game in 1962 and saying, that's where I want to go to school. And I always laughed because I didn't apply to many places, and I got in. I always kid. SC in those days was a night school. I'm very proud of it now. I've been on the board of trustees for 25 years, and today it's a wonderful school, a great school.
Yeah.
And I got an alumni award a few years ago, and I said, if I applied to this place today, they wouldn't even let me get a brochure because they'd say, we're not wasting paper on this application. But I loved it. And I wanted to stay, but I wanted to start a company, and my dad talked me into coming back. He had a cousin who had a small station. He said, look, I'll invest in this if you run it. While you're waiting to start your company, do this. And when I first came back, I said, what have I done? For about 6 months. And then afterwards, I fell in love with Indianapolis. And as our company grew, and we were in all these big places, New York, LA, Washington, Chicago, people said, why do you still live there? And I said, because I love it. I would never live anywhere else.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So did you come back to Indy right after law school?
Yeah.
Was it,
Little while. Looked at some deals with some friends, and then came back within the year.
So I want to talk about, you've mentioned it, but how you got into radio. So you were actually involved and starting to learn about radio. Was this even before? Was it before college?
It was a hobby. It was always a hobby.
Yeah.
I got my first job when I was in college.
Okay.
At KBC. I'll never forget. I had an interview with a friend's relative, and he said, we're not hiring, but let's talk. And we talked, and he said, how do you know all this stuff? And I said, well, it's my hobby. And I always say, when you love something, you learn a lot about it.
Yeah.
So they hired me as a producer, and it was just always what I loved.
Yeah.
And I always thought that's what I want to do.
So you end up getting to radio, obviously, and deciding to buy a station.
Yeah.
So somewhere along the line, at what point did you end up meeting a young David Letterman who was
the first station, which was the ultimate fixer-upper, was a station called WNTS.
Okay.
And my dad invested in it, and he said, I'll do this if you'll come back and run it. Did, and we switched it to news, talk, and sports. And we needed a midday talk show host. And my brother, who just passed away earlier this year, said, you got to hire Letterman. And I watched him. David and I are 5 days apart, and we had mutual friends, but didn't really know him. And I watched him on Channel 13 doing weather, and he was hilarious.
Yeah.
And we hired him to do talk. And it was fabulous. So when he took the job, he said, look, I'm going to do this for a year. I'm going to California to make it, see if I can do it. Great. Did it for a year left. And after he left, he was actually a special correspondent for us for, I think, another year when he was we were getting him some money while he was trying to make it in LA.
Yeah. That's amazing. So you stayed in touch with him over the years?
Not as much. David, when we were private, David was on our board for a while, and we stayed in touch and been with him a few times. I laugh. The worst speaking engagement I ever had was when Joanne Gora was president of Ball State. She said, would you give the keynote address to the dedication of the David Letterman building?
Yeah, I remember that.
And I said, sure, great. What do you want? She said, give me 20 minutes. It's great. So about 3 days before the speech, I realized that it's going to be outside and there's going to be 35,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And I called Joanne. I said, Joanne, if I do 20 minutes while people are waiting for Dave, they're going to kill me. And I remember starting the speech saying, there's thousands and thousands of you, and there's not one person in this crowd, including my own wife, who wants to hear me. You all want to hear Dave. So I tried to make it brief, and Dave was great, and we laughed. And, I've stayed in touch with him peripherally, not close, but Brilliant guy.
It's neat that you had that association with him early on. So I want to turn to 1980. You decided to take the entrepreneurial plunge, and you founded Emmis Communications.
Right.
Of course, Emmis is in Hebrew, stands for truth.
Right.
Talk a little bit about your decision to decide, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and I'm going to go do this. And how did you? I know you said your dad was an entrepreneur, so maybe you really watched him. But talk about like deciding to ultimately take that plunge.
Well, I basically had wanted to do it, and actually looked at some stations with some friends in California when I was just finishing law school. We spent some time on that, and then looked at a couple of stations here, didn't get them. Looked at one in Milwaukee, didn't get it. And then we had the chance to buy what was then WSVL in Shelbyville, the FM, and it was an undeveloped station. And made a deal, found my partners, made a deal. I can still remember, I think we put in $250,000 of equity. I think they put in $85,000 each, and I put in the rest for everything I could borrow and save and win on game shows.
I want to talk to you about that in a minute.
And the sellers took a note, and that was the start of it.
Yeah, unbelievable. So, and your partners at that time were guys that I became partners with, Mickey Maurer and Bob Schloss, who of course owned IBJ for a lot of years. And then I, back in 2017, began to buy into IBJ. Right. And so those guys were your partners too. And,
they were.
And I know, like in business, because I've been through it. There are ups and downs, and you talk about that. You're very. We're going to get to more detail about your book, but you're very open about the challenges that come with having partners.
Yeah, and I've never really. It was funny because the thing was a skyrocket. The first station was in the top 3 in Indianapolis in a year. We bought Minneapolis. And the manager, who ended up becoming a senior executive with us, even while we're waiting for FCC approval, produced a turnaround. I always said just the threat of Emmis management makes things work, kind of facetiously, because he did a great job without anything to do with us.
Yeah.
And then we bought our 3rd and 4th stations, and so the company really grew spectacularally. And I think it was a skyrocket, and I loved it. It's what I always wanted to do. Mickey and Bob really didn't, want to grow, and I fully understood that. So we had an agreement to buy them out. We worked through that.
Yeah.
And 4 years later, after it started, we bought them out.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned a game show. To me, this is one of the most fascinating things. So you appeared as a contestant, if I've got this right, on a game show called the Las Vegas Gambit.
That is
Gambit.
That is correct.
And you ended up winning $20,000, which is a lot. If that's
in those days, yes,
that's a lot of money back in 1981. Is that right?
And what's ironic is the host was Wink Martindale.
Was that really?
And later, Wink was in radio in L.A., and we got to know each other and laughed about it. He swears he remembered me. I think he didn't.
Yeah.
But we won. My then wife and I won. And what happened was we were at the Las Vegas NAB convention. My first convention. We're starting the radio station, buying equipment, and we're in the coffee shop. And somebody came up to us, and we were holding my daughter, Carrie. And the guy said, "Are you married?" And I kind of think, well, yeah, because the two of us have this baby. And he said, "Well, we're looking for married couples for Gambit." And one thing led to another, and they picked us, and we did it and won. And I used some of those winnings to help start Emmis.
It's such a awesome story. I mean, just how that just happened out of nowhere.
What's funny is there are archives of that, and it must pop up on the Game Show Network. And over the years, about 5 or 6 times, people called me and said, "I just watched you," and I've seen clips.
I'm going to have to dig that up.
Yeah,
somehow.
well, hopefully you won't, but it was fun.
That's very cool. So, you eventually end up, as I mentioned in the intro, you end up buying stations in L.A., New York, D.C., Chicago, and everywhere in between.
Yeah.
Which is heady stuff for a Hoosier growing up in Indianapolis, and deciding I'm going to own some of the biggest stations in the biggest cities of America.
Yeah.
Talk about what that was like as going in, and
Well,
I'm sure you're dealing with some pretty interesting characters
oh my
that
God.
own these
Oh
stations.
my God.
It must have been quite an experience.
There were thousands of those stories. It was funny because we really did well in Indianapolis and Minneapolis right away. And we sort of said, and I owe so much of this to the people around me, especially Rick Cummings, who's really the programming guru of all of this, with the exception of WFAN, which is a fun story.
Yeah, we look forward to talking about that.
But somebody said to me, a friend who was a broker said, look, Century Broadcasting has stations in Chicago or St. Louis and San Francisco, and they're thinking of selling it. And I had done all the math, and I said, boy, Los Angeles is the best market in the world. And then and now, still the largest radio market in the world. And we only bought fixer-uppers. We bought stations with no ratings and took our chances.
Okay.
And we ended up making a deal for St. Louis and L.A. And, we tried something with a very famous disc jockey, Robert W. Morgan. Didn't work. But at the time, Jim Riggs, who passed away 2 years ago, Jim did our research, and Jim said there is a coalition format here between, African Americans, Hispanics, younger people, and sort of suburban white kids. And we put it in the back of our mind, and we gave it a year, and we didn't do what we wanted. And we said, let's put it on the air. And we put it on the air. I'll never forget, in January of 1986. And we always laughed. In those days in radio, you knew when you had something. When you're driving down the street and your windows are open and you hear the car on your left or your right playing your radio station.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. About a month into it, Rick said, it's everywhere. And it became one of the great success stories. And like I say, I owe it all to Rick and Doyle Rose, who was the executive in Minneapolis, who, moved to LA. They really made it work. And it became one of the great stories. And in radio, if something works, people copy it.
Yeah.
And I always laughed. I'm driving through southern Indiana, and I see a billboard for a station, Power something. We were Power 106, Power 93.
Yeah.
And it had the same billboard, the same slogan. I'm thinking, they understand that there are no young Hispanics or young African Americans or suburban white kids in this neighborhood.
Yeah.
But
they like to copy the
everybody
the verbiage.
copied what was hot. Yeah, that was the radio industry.
That's interesting. So in your book, again, it's called Never Ride a Rollercoaster Upside Down, which, by the way, is an awesome title. And but you talk about getting into sports talk radio. And this was way before. I mean, you were the first to think about this format, and you write about how your colleagues thought you were nuts.
Yes,
and but you decided to push, and you said because you had some success and some other things, they decided to say, okay, Jeff, if you really want to do this, but you did what I think successful entrepreneurs do, which is push and go with your gut. So talk about that a little bit. How did you come up with that?
Well, it's funny. I always kidded. We had only done FM stations, and the Doubleday family, which also owned the New York Mets, was selling out of the radio business. And they had an FM in Washington we really wanted and an AM in New York we really wanted. But it came with an AM with an AM. So it had two FMs we really wanted, and we had never owned any AM stations. And I'll never forget, I always had the idea, and I was sitting in a coffee shop with Steve Crane, who was a lifelong friend who, when I started Emmis, came in. And he said, what do you want to do with the AM? And I said, I want to do all sports. Really? And I said, look, AM is only going to be for information. Music is not going to work there anymore. Even though at the time that radio station had like the largest country music audience in America. Well, that sounds very impressive, except there's 17 million people in New York.
Right.
And the reality is it was like 25th in the market. It was an also-ran.
Yeah.
So I said, look, it's got to be information. And WABC and WOR are doing talk, and WINS and WCBS are doing news. So you got to do something different. And I had this idea to do all sports when I was not paying attention in a class at USC a decade earlier. And so I brought it to our team, and I'll never forget, we had a managers meeting, and Steve loved the idea, and a couple other managers loved the idea, and it got voted down. And I'll never forget, I walked out of the meeting, and Steve said, what do you want to do? I said, look, you cannot lead where others won't follow. They don't want to do it. The next day, Rick Cummings and Doyle Rose came back and said, look, we still think this is an epically stupid idea, but we owe you one. So we're doing well everywhere else. So we'll do it. We'll hire somebody. They'll do it. We don't want to deal with it. And we put it on the air, and it was a disaster. First 6 months, Joel Hollander was our sales manager. Joel later became the president of CBS. He said he always remembers walking down the street with me in New York one day saying, Joel, if there's 17 million people here, what do you think one or two of them would like to buy commercials on this radio station? He said it was the most deflating. He said, you are not a person who beats up on people. So for you to say that, I'll never forgot. But Jim Lampley, who was one of our first hosts, called it the Vietnam War of Emmis. My friend John Dilley, who is from Elkhart and one of my big brothers in the industry, called me one day and said, I always used to think you're a really smart guy. And then I listened to that radio station, and you're really just not very smart. So it didn't work. And then we made a couple changes. We bought the NBC stations a year later, and we had to switch. You could only have one AM and one FM. So we picked the better NBC signal, and the better AM and FM, and we moved it. And we inherited Don Imus.
Oh, yeah.
And we also put Mike and the Mad Dog on earlier, and everything clicked. Jim Riggs did research I'll never forget. And after the first 6 months, he asked the question, where do you go for sports news? And like 90% of the people said, I still go to WCBS and WINS. A year later, he asked the question, and 90% went to the Fan.
Wow.
So everything clicked. One of my favorite moments was I knew Don Imus's agent because he was the agent for one of our guys in L.A., and we were talking about bringing him over. And at this time, Don was just coming out of rehab. The Mets, if you remember at that time, had a major bunch of drug scandals.
Oh, yeah.
And the radio station was losing record amounts of money. And I remember saying, we were going to bring in a guy who's a recovering addict, a baseball team which has substance abuse problems and is destroying the team, and a radio station losing record amounts of money. What could possibly go wrong?
Exactly.
But we did it. Don never, ever, he stayed sober the rest of his life. I've always said Don was a big reason that it worked, but it just became, within the next year, became one of the great success stories. And people always ask me, there's now 700 sports stations. And I had to laugh. My daughter went on AI and said, who's the father of sports radio? And it popped up me, and she was teasing me.
Yeah.
And it said, did you ever expect there'd be 700 sports stations? I said, I didn't think there'd be one. But,
It's cool.
And we're a bunch of needlers at Emmis. So the first year, it was like, it's 5 o'clock. We lost another $23,000 at Fan. They were needling me. And then when it turned around, I have a favorite saying in life. The line between being a genius and an idiot is very fine.
Yeah.
And in the book, I have a chapter, Idiot to Genius, which is WFAN. And then the next chapter is Genius to Idiot, which is the Seattle Mariners. So in life, if you're taking chances, you're going to be on both sides.
No, it's right. But it shows, too, that, not everything works immediately. Like you've got to have some perseverance, and you got to stick with it if you believe in it, which you did. Yeah. And the team did, and then it just takes the right moment for it to click, which you just described, and it's a pretty great story. Yeah. So you mentioned father of the sports talk radio, but what about father of hip hop radio? Because you also helped create a couple of the massive hip hop stations. I think were they both in L.A.?
No, L.A. and New York.
L.A. and New York. And so talk about like how you decided to move in that area.
Well, Joe Donnelly is an old friend. Joe was a U.S. Senator.
Yeah.
And he says he introduces me to friends as the king of hip hop. And obviously, you look at me, I don't look like the king of hip hop. Yeah. Rick Cummings really had more to do with that. And really, that was Rick's baby. He spotted it. It went back to the original research that Jim Riggs did on the coalition. And when we put it on in L.A., it was one of the great success stories of all time. And then we did it in New York, same thing. So
yeah, it's awesome. So eventually, you decide to expand into TV and magazine publishing. Talk about your decision to go beyond radio.
Well, when the Communications Act of 1996 came about, you just saw just an influx of capital, Wall Street, those funds, hedge funds, private equity.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is valuations went crazy. And we used to joke that if your station was worth 10 times on Monday, on Tuesday it was worth 12 times, and by Friday it was worth 15 times,
Wow.
and next week it was 20 times. And we looked at this and said, look, this is a nice business. It grows between 4 and 7% a year, and that should produce 10 to 12% cash flow growth. So that's nice, but it ain't never going to sustain this. So we early on said, this isn't sustainable. Greg Nathanson, who had been on my board and was a roommate in college and was president of the Fox stations and ran Showtime, we both said, look, television has not had this explosion. We think the math works better in TV. So we did it. We bought a number of stations. And I always kid it. I told Greg, I'm doing this if you run it. And he ran it for a couple of years. And then his brother sold the family cable business for like $3 billion to Paul Allen.
Wow.
And Greg was the third largest shareholder. And he said, I think I'm not going to fly to Mobile or Green Bay anymore. So but we were fortunate we had other people to manage it.
So eventually, speaking of capital markets, you eventually decide to take Emmis public, right? After being the largest private owner of the media platforms we've been talking about. It always seems to me that as a business guy that going public is just it's kind of an iconic thing in America, right?
It is.
Talk about that experience and decision. And
I always say being public is the greatest thing in the world in a growing industry.
Yeah,
and being public in a declining industry is the worst.
Yeah,
and I've lived both sides. And one day you wake up and I'll never forget, we were on a family vacation and the stock went to $130 a share. And my nephew said, do you realize how much this is worth to you? And I went, but it was in favor.
Yeah.
I always knew it was going to decline, but I loved it.
Yeah.
And if I have one enduring mistake, the mistake is I didn't sell when I knew that it was peaking.
Yeah.
But I legendary discussions with Sam Zell, and I said, Sam, he wanted to merge, and I said, Sam, I should merge with you. My friend Jerry Reinsdorf put us together, and we had a series of meetings. And I said, if I want to make the most money, I do this all day long, because you're going to wake up in 2 years and say, this is peaked and we're out.
Mm-hmm.
But I love it.
Yeah.
And if it peaks and it still provides a livelihood for me and all of our people, I want to keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That single statement makes me probably the stupidest person that you've ever had in the studio. But on the other hand, we were fortunate. We did see it and we got out. And my friends who stayed in it have all gone bankrupt. So not bad.
Well, it does speak a lot to how you think about running a company, which is culture and the people. And I know from talking to you over the years how important that is to you. And you've won awards for great culture through the years. And so I understand that that's kind of where you're coming from too. And you loved it so much. You talk about how much you love the industry, right?
Love the people, love the industry. I was just playing golf with friends, in Florida from the industry, and just laughed about the old times. It was a wonderful industry. It's hard to believe how different it is today.
I'm sure.
It's wonderful.
I'm sure. Well, before we take a break, I wanted to ask you about, because there's a fun statement, and it's related to, you decided to make an investment, I think, in Eastern Europe. Maybe it was Hungary. And then there's a statement about something about being taken over by Putin's friend or something of that nature when I was reading the book. But talk about your decision to go in Eastern Europe and what happened.
Well, I had been an ambassador to the ITU. So I was the U.S. ambassador to the ITU, memorable experience, and it was right after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Mm-hmm. And what we found is that privatization was coming. Everybody was following the American model.
Yeah.
We had a chance to bid on the license in Hungary, and we won. We were one of two licensees, and it was just a gigantic business. I mean, it was, I think, out of a country of 11 million people, we reached 4 million people, 5 million people a week.
Wow.
And I always joked, I would meet with prime ministers and they'd say, here's what your morning show said today.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was iconic. And I think it blindsided us, because when Viktor Orban came in, we just thought, well, nobody's going to do this. They're not going to destroy a national institution.
So it was Viktor Orban.
It was
who's still there today.
He's still there. Yeah. I was the first of the people.
Wow.
Who Viktor Orban, he really took over the media business right before he was elected. And I will never forget, when it was happening, I had a friend, Bill Kennard, who was a former FCC chair. And Bill had just been installed as the United States ambassador to the European Union in Brussels.
Okay.
And I called him. I said, Bill, we're being nationalized. He said, Jeff, they're a member of the EU. They can't nationalize you. I said, Bill, we're being nationalized. He said, Jeff, they can't do it. They can't do it. I said, Bill, trust me. About a week later, he called and he said, Jeff, you're right. They're being nationalized. I said, no shit, Bill. I know this. I'm living it. So, yeah, it was an amazing experience.
Oh, my gosh. That's part of that roller coaster ride.
Well, when I give speeches, I said, look, until you've actually been nationalized, you really haven't run a business. This is the height of the experience when you've been nationalized.
I'm hoping that we don't experience that.
You don't want to be nationalized.
Yeah, we don't want that. Well, more ahead with Jeff Smulyan when we return to Off the Record podcast presented by Prolific. Stay with us. Most organizations hit a point where growth stalls, the message blends in, the site stops converting, the pipeline softens. That's when I tell leaders about Prolific, the growth firm for purpose-driven leaders. Through full-service marketing and strategy, they clarify the story, rebuild your go-to-market, and drive sales. Most importantly, Prolific holds itself accountable to the metrics that matter to you. If you're ready for your next growth stage, learn more about Prolific at prolifichq.com. Welcome back to Off the Record podcast. I'm Nate Feltman, CEO of IBJ Media, and we're talking today with Jeff Smulyan, Chairman, CEO, and founder of Emmis Corporation. Well, Jeff, I want to talk about, I know that's something fun in your experiences, and that was in 1989. You were part of a group that bought the Seattle Mariners.
Right.
So love to hear how the heck that even became a thing, how the opportunity came about, and how you decided to pursue it.
Well, we really had decided that we were going to buy big market radio stations. And by then, we had bought NBC. We bought another station in Houston. So we were in most of the top 10 with FM stations. So in those days, you could only buy one FM in a market.
Yeah.
So we said, we've done pretty much what we're doing. And we used to say, once you've been in New York or LA, you're really not dying to go into Kokomo or Fort Wayne, all due respect to Kokomo and Fort Wayne. And we had carried the Mets with WFAN. We inherited them. So we got to know a lot of people in baseball. And somebody came to me and said, look, you guys are the turnaround guys. You guys, and baseball desperately needs marketing expertise.
Interesting.
In Seattle. Seattle is the worst franchise in baseball. And I'll never forget, we went through ownership, and my dear friend Jerry Reinsdorf was chairman of the ownership committee, and he said, well, you're obviously going to be approved. If you want my advice, don't buy the Mariners. But
right?
Being stupid, I did. I loved it. I loved the city. I always said I'd like to do anything in Seattle but own their baseball team. But I made great friends. The best management we ever did was the marketing of that team. I have to laugh. You see things in ballparks all over America now that was revolutionary when we did them. I mean, we did all sorts of crazy stuff. We had singles nights. We had all sorts of crazy promotions with the kid, charity stuff. We were the first people to do indoor fireworks. I'll never forget when we were behind going into the bottom of the ninth inning and we played the clip from Animal House. Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?
Yeah.
And then we did the bit from Hoosier. We did all sorts of crazy stuff. And I was very proud of it. And we had record attendance, but the math was just, I said, look, to own the Seattle Mariners or the Kansas City Royals, you need to be a billionaire. If you own the Yankees or the Dodgers or the Red Sox and you have a decent paper route, you're okay.
Yeah.
But we couldn't afford the losses.
Yeah. And so you write in your book that eventually you become a not so liked guy, apparently, in Seattle. So what precipitated that? What actually happened?
And I laugh because my friend Steve Paul, one of my oldest friends and one of our lawyers, would come to the ballpark. And in our first year or two, we were heroes. I mean, you walk down the street and people ask for your autograph or take your picture. They're always sticking a microphone in your face. And one night we were at the ballpark and we were going to get something to eat after the game. And I said, I had to go out and I would sign autographs for like 30 minutes with kids and whatever. And he turned to me and he said, any society that values your autograph is a society which is doomed to failure. Never forget that moment. But it was, we were younger and we were kind of, I guess the last owner had been a Southern California real estate developer, which doesn't work well. And so we were more progressive, and we did a lot of fun things that people liked. But the problem was, we said, we can't, and the day I bought it, I said, we're going to give our best shot. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. So I won't get into all the deals, but we had a situation where by the third year, the bank said, you guys either move it. We'd love you to move it, but this doesn't work. And so we basically told the county that we had a clause to leave. And we said, look, we're either going to sell it or move it, but we can't do this. And that, I think the thing that was interesting was nobody in Seattle thought anybody in their right mind would buy it. So it was going to move.
Okay.
Now, as a practical matter, Nintendo bought it for a reason which I won't get into.
Okay.
But I think everybody thought I was going to be the guy to take the team away. And I always laugh. I always say everybody should be a pariah once in your life. And I was. My favorite story, excuse me, but I still get people from Seattle come up and say, no, we loved you. And I go, I don't remember it that way. But my favorite story was the last month or so we owned the team, and I'm sitting up in the owner's box, and a guy walks by in the concourse below, and he looks up to me and he says, Smulyan, get out of our town. Get out of our town. And I look, and the guy's wearing a Red Sox uniform. And I said, this explains the experience in Seattle. A guy wearing a Red Sox uniform.
Wow.
But that was, but I loved it. We made some great friends.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the, I'm trying to remember some of the stories as I read your book, and you were talking about, I think you were talking about how wonderful Ken Griffey Jr. Wasn't he there? Wasn't he there when you were there?
Kenny was there. That was the part I missed the most.
Yeah. And
Kenny would come in every night, and Gary, who was my dearest friend, was president when I was, under me or whatever. And Kenny would come behind home plate every night, where we would sit for a couple of innings where we had to go upstairs and entertain people. And before every game, he'd just come in and shoot the breeze.
Yeah.
And he was the best. I always thought that if he had stayed healthy, he would have been the greatest baseball player.
Yeah, he was incredible, all-star. Yeah, I remember when I was growing up, he was one of the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. At some point, tell me if I've got this wrong or not. At some point, did you investigate the idea or the possibility of bringing a Major League Baseball team to Indianapolis? Do I have that? Is that my imagination?
Actually before the Mariners.
Was it before? Okay.
Art Angotti, the late Art Angotti, and the late Bart Kaufman, and a few other people explored it, and they asked me to be involved, and I sort of was peripherally involved in the Indianapolis Aeros. And what I learned early on, largely because of media, is that this market can't work for baseball.
Yeah, a lot of games.
A lot of games.
Cincinnati, and
we were lucky to get the Colts. We were lucky to get the Pacers. With the NFL, you're going to make, $14 billion in TV every year. So everybody makes money no matter what. And the NBA was a more challenging situation. But in baseball, you got 81 home games a year. So it's all a function of local media dollars and disposable income.
Yeah.
And we didn't have enough. And we were surrounded by other media markets with teams. Cincinnati, the Cincinnati TV market starts 60 miles south of here. The Chicago market starts 90, so you had Chicago, St. Louis. Terre Haute was always a St. Louis team. So the math, and I knew that. People always thought we were going to move the Mariners to Indianapolis. I knew the last place. And I've been asked about this 100 times.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work here.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So, as you've talked about, you kind of knew or could feel that radio was changing. There was big disruption with digital platform streaming and just the changing and consumer behavior that was being brought about by these new mediums.
Yeah, 5,000 cuts.
Yeah. So when did you really start feeling the winds are changing and radio's future is not as bright as it had been when you were growing?
We made the decision to leave TV about 2007.
Okay.
And we had a long debate. And Randy Bartengarten, who had been president of NBC Radio and then came over as one of our senior executives and then ended up running our TV group, we debated, and Randy said there's more future in TV than radio. And we sort of said probably, but we have beachfront property in radio. We have New York, LA, Chicago, Washington, San Francisco. That's the most desirable properties. And in TV, our biggest markets are Portland, Oregon, and Orlando, and New Orleans, and so somebody asked me what it was like, and TV's had its own problems. I said, selling TV and keeping radio was like parachuting from the Hindenburg and landing on the Titanic. Either outcome was bad.
Yeah.
But we made the decision. We knew we had too much debt and we needed to pay down debt. So we made the decision to sell TV and keep radio.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In retrospect, we should have sold them both.
Yeah. So today, what is there one of the companies that you're excited about when you look at the portfolio of companies that Emmis is involved in?
I love our sound masking business, DigiNX.
Okay.
It controls, dynamic pricing business, DigiNX. Lencor's our sound masking business. I love DigiNX. It is a business which really finds dynamic pricing, the optimal price for mostly entertainment, attractions, performing arts. And we have everything from Carnegie Hall to the Royal Albert Hall to the Sydney Bridge Climb, zoos, museums. We're really pretty much now all over Australia, going into Japan. So I love that business. We think it has a great chance to grow. I like our sound masking business, which controls sound in offices and hospitals. Of course, I've always said we bought that business. I always say, if you want to know how brilliant I am, we bought a business that controls sound in offices and hospitals 30 days before a pandemic shut down all offices and closed all hospitals.
Wow. Yeah.
So it took us a while, but it's recovering. And we're also invested in, we help manage a company called Anzu, which is an Israeli company which has pioneered the use of real-time advertising in video games. And we love that business. That's growing like a weed.
That's interesting.
So we like that.
Yeah.
So it's different.
Yeah.
But I'm one of those people who can never quit.
Yeah.
I love what I do.
I love that. That's the way you are. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to talk about your book a little bit more.
Yeah.
Never Ride a Rollercoaster Upside Down. And you share that the moment you rode a roller coaster as a young man, you realized that if you want to succeed as an entrepreneur, you can't panic when you're upside down. I think is that kind of
pretty much, yeah. And that's, you learn the great lessons of life in adversity.
Absolutely.
My dearest friend, the day we sold the Mariners, he said, "Is there anything we could have done?" I said, "Once we bought it, no." But I said, you'll look back and this is the best management, because when things are bad, you really are creative.
That's when you learn.
With the first radio station, WNTS, we did some stuff, best management I've ever seen, and we knew that station was never going to make it.
Yeah.
So you learn the lesson of life in adversity.
Absolutely. So when looking back at writing the book, and now that the book has been out for a few years, are there certain key takeaways that you want a young entrepreneur to have? I know this is one that you just talked about, that that adversity is going to come.
Yeah.
Are there a couple other key takeaways from your perspective?
You win with culture. You win with people. You've got to treat your people well. I wrote the 10 Commandments of Emmis, and then we added the 11th after we sold the baseball team. Admit your mistakes. But I think it's, creating a culture where people feel at home. I think the most gratifying thing when I hear from former employees and they say, best place I ever worked. I can't tell you how neat that is.
That is awesome. Yeah.
So I think, how you treat people, how you get everybody to sort of buy into whatever the vision of the enterprise is.
Absolutely. No, that's great. So I want to talk about your engagement in the community here, because you have been deeply involved for many decades in the Indianapolis community, and talk about why that continues to be a priority for you, and why maybe you think business leaders have a responsibility to be engaged in the community.
I've always said, if I have one regret, I'm not the benefactor I had hoped that I would be. But I have been able to donate some things, and I've given an awful lot of my time. I think you have an obligation to the people, all people, to make their lives better.
Yeah.
I think there's a better spirit of that in this community than anywhere in America. There are very few CEOs or successful people in this town who don't roll up their sleeves and say, how can I help? Yeah. That's what I love about this place the most.
Yeah. That's right.
Somebody once said, when you give your word to somebody in Indianapolis, you can take it to the bank.
That's right.
And I love that about this town.
Well, it's a community in which everybody has an open door policy, number
Yep.
one.
Right.
Takes meetings, especially when somebody, asks you to do so.
Yeah.
And it's a close-knit community
It
too.
is.
And so like if you don't keep up to your word, you're going to be in trouble in this community.
Yeah. And I think I guess Clay Robbins and I are the last two surviving founders of CICP. But CICP, when it was founded, I don't know, 25, 26 years ago, the idea really was by the endowment and Lilly Corporation to get CEOs in the city and the region to get to know each other
Yeah.
and work together. And I'm very, very proud of that because I think it's made more of an impact on this community than about anything else.
Yeah, no,
Very proud of that.
I'm fortunate to serve with you now on that
Yes.
board,
Yep.
and it's going to continue to do great things, I know, for our community and for the state as a whole. So Jeff, when you look back, I mean, I rattled off a lot of honors and awards that you've been, you've been awarded with.
Yeah.
But when you reflect back on the years, you did mention just that it's the people. So maybe that's the answer to my question. But is there something that really sticks out to you on this long journey you've been on with all the ups and downs and the fun times? What do you look back on?
I think it sounds so trite, but it's a journey. The friends, and I had to laugh because we just spent days on the golf course in Florida talking about all the times and the friendships and the relationships. And it really is that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very proud of some of the things we did. I couldn't have done any of it without wonderful people around me. I always say, if you live long enough, and you're not indicted, they give you awards. So
That's right.
I've gotten more awards than I deserve, but it's been the journey. It's been the friends.
Well, I can tell you that reading your book was a lot of fun. There are so many good stories in there, and especially for a young entrepreneur that is getting started, just life lessons and important just stories that I know will have an impact. I always ask my guests and you've named a lot of people during our time together today, Jeff. But is there a mentor or two that was really important to you that kind of helped you along the way?
I'll name three. Irv Katz, Katz Sapper Miller.
Yeah.
I always looked up to. He was a friend of my dad's. When I first started, I went to him my first business plan, and he basically said, "You're going to be fine." And I think that gave me the confidence.
Yeah.
Irv Katz said I knew what I was doing. That was fine.
Yeah.
John Dilley, I mentioned, was like a big brother in the radio business. We've stayed dear friends. I always looked up to John when I was starting. He's not that much older, but enough older. Family's in Elkhart, and they own the newspaper there, and we've been dear friends. And then since then, Jerry Reinsdorf has been a big brother. We just became dear friends in baseball and have stayed that way. If you listen to our conversations, you'd never believe all the needling that goes back and forth. But I've always valued his advice. He always said, "I always give you my advice, and you do the opposite thing," which may be true, but I've always looked up to him and loved that relationship.
That's awesome. Those are great. I haven't asked you, but I'll ask you. You've been involved in politics like a lot of us, and are there any moments in your career and being engaged in politics that to stick out as interesting, fun, or just any reflections on your years involved?
I've had
there?
a lot of fun experiences. I've made a lot of good friends, mostly Democrats.
Yeah.
I've been asked about thinking about running. I've always said I'd be the worst candidate of all time. I'd probably go over to the legislature and kill them all. You don't want me as a elected official.
Yeah.
But I love it. I think again, it's giving back. I think you and I, although we're somewhat different, I have a strange feeling you're pretty close in how we view issues.
Absolutely.
I always kid Al Hubbard. Al is sort of a lifelong Republican. I'm a lifelong Democrat.
Yeah.
And we work together on projects. We always come to consensus.
Yeah.
But I'm just a believer that, that the goal of making the human condition better is a very worthy goal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Jeff, we made it to the end of the regular time and to what we call the speed round off the record. We're
ready.
We ask the same questions of all of our guests. So I'll start with your favorite movie.
Probably Animal House, only because there's so many lines in that movie that we've used over the years.
That's awesome.
There are more meaningful movies than that, a lot of them.
Do you know who else gave me that answer?
Who's that?
Jim Morris.
Yeah.
That's what he told me too.
Yeah, it's funny. Years ago, I think the Heartland Film Festival asked me to do an ad about, and I said Animal House, and most people said Gone with the Wind
Yeah.
or, whatever, really, Casablanca. And I had a couple of friends said, "What is wrong with you? How could you do it?" But I always thought it was just a look at life that I find that makes me laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Favorite place to vacation?
I like South Florida. I like Palm Springs. We've taken family trips. Love Sydney. I thought Sydney was one of the great places of all time. Thought Shanghai was the most interesting place I've been. I've been there 3 times.
Wow.
I always thought it's like somebody built New York City in 10 years.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Right. Favorite musical artist?
Well, I love the Beatles. I'm very proud that I got my daughter, the youngest, into the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Jackson Brown, Kenny Loggins, a lot of old rock and roll.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like I didn't have this in my questions, but is there you being an owner of radio stations, especially back in the 80s and 90s? Is there a favorite artist that you met that you said, or like an interesting guy that you met?
I met a number of them. Actually, it was funny. We were talking about Yoko Ono. I spent a day with Yoko Ono when she was visiting Budapest.
Oh, wow.
That was it, because she was doing something with our network, and we had spent like 4 or 5 hours, and she's a nice, fascinating lady.
Interesting.
I never really cared. I was never somebody. I remember getting my oldest daughter to meet Debbie Gibson, because in those days, Debbie Gibson was her idol.
Yeah.
And I've taken my youngest to see McCartney a number of times. For her graduation present, we went to Milan and saw the Stones.
Oh, cool.
I've I've met a lot of people, but I wasn't one of those people who said, "God, I got to meet so-and-so."
Right. Yeah. What's the first thing you do in the morning?
2 things: get up and have a giant mug of coffee.
Yep.
And then I read. I am a compulsive reader. I actually read a couple industry trades. And also the first thing I read is Heather Cox Richardson. I find her to be the most insightful analyst out there.
Oh, cool. So, speaking of reading, title of the last book you read, or one of your favorite books?
Well, it's funny. I was thinking about that. I read Cable Cowboy by John Malone, because John Malone really has had more influence on American media than anybody alive. And I dealt with him, knew him, thought it was interesting. I read a book on, I'm trying to remember the name, on intercollegiate athletics, because I'm very involved with that.
Yeah.
On the challenges that football faces, I read one of Heather Cox Richardson's book. I don't know. So I don't read as many books, but I probably spend more time reading than anybody I know.
Oh, that's
I
great.
compile worthless information.
What food can you not live without?
I love burgers and fries.
Yeah.
I like chicken.
Yeah.
I like tuna, macaroni and cheese. My kids say great food's wasted on you, Dad. Take you to a great restaurant. And it's true. I go to all these great restaurants, especially in New York, and somebody said, "How was it?" I said, "I don't know."
Yeah. Okay. Favorite sports team?
Well, I'm obviously a fanatical USC Trojan fan.
Yeah.
I've been involved there. I live and die with the Trojans. I live and die with the Pacers, and I live and die with the Colts.
Yeah.
Those are my 3. And as my wife will tell you, when any of the 3 are on, I'm usually watching.
You've been a long time Pacers season ticket holder for forever.
I've had the same seats for about 30 years.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I often identify you. I see you there. There's Jeff.
Yeah.
Speaking of your Trojans, I think they're making, I don't know if it's their first, but they're coming to IU and play IU football next year. So
not the first.
It's not the first.
Not the first. The first was a September game, probably 40 years ago.
Is that right?
Because I went.
Yeah.
I'll be there on November 10th.
Let's go. Let's go together, because I'll be there too.
I will tell you, what I've learned is I went to Purdue this year, and I always go to Notre Dame at the end of the year. And I went to Champaign because we played 3 games.
Yeah.
And I sit with our athletic director, and our president was there for a couple games. And what I've learned is they put you on the top of the end zone, not the end zone, but of the suite section.
Yeah.
And you're always in the corner. And I'm thinking, any other seats would be better than this. You're looking through glass. But,
Right.
So
that is true.
It'll be fun.
That's going to be a lot of fun. I've got a really good buddy who went to USC, and we traditionally, he's come in for the Notre Dame USC game, but he's going to come in for the IU one. I can't wait.
I always say the worst drive I ever make is every other year when I'm driving back from South Bend at 1 a.m. and they've beaten us by 3 touchdowns.
I was at the Bush Push game where they didn't. I thought Notre Dame was going to win, and USC got us. You probably were there.
Was I there? And I remember sitting there saying, "Wait a minute, it's not over," and then seeing it was
Leinart and the Bush Push.
Yeah.
Best advice you've ever received?
The only thing you've got in life is your word.
Yeah.
You never jeopardize your integrity.
Yeah.
And I always say to people, if your word is good, nothing else matters. And if your word is not good, nothing else matters.
Yeah.
So I would say that.
Yeah.
That is,
That's good. So last question, Jeff, advice for a young person who wants to become a leader, like you in the community or in a business, best advice?
I think the most important thing is care about other people. Do whatever's asked of you and more. Listen more than you talk.
I love it. That is really, really good. Well, Jeff, I can't thank you enough for joining me on the Indiana 250 podcast. Can't thank you for all you've done for this city, for the state, and especially for sharing your life's incredible roller coaster ride, which has been awesome. Thanks for the time.
I've loved it.
Thank you. Thank you. To learn more about other leaders on IBJ Media's Indiana 250 list, go to indiana250.com and look for a Page 2 feature each week in IBJ. We'll be back with the new Indiana 250 off-the-record conversation soon.
I'm Tiffany Souter, mom of 4, wife, entrepreneur, and host of the Life of And podcast. For years, I built my life with brute force, a successful business, a growing family, and absolutely zero margin. I was tired, snappy, and felt constantly behind, and I was too afraid to admit it. Everything changed when I stopped trying to do more and started building systems that actually worked for my real life. If you too are craving more peace, more presence, and just more time for you, I'd love for you to join me on the Life of And. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app or listen at ibjpodcast.com.
Thanks for listening to this IBJ Media podcast. You're probably going to remember this ad. Do you know why? Podcast advertising works. 85% of listeners recalled hearing an ad during a podcast, and 70% of podcast listeners have acted after hearing an ad. So whether you're looking to be heard across the entire IBJ Media podcast network, sponsor one of our shows, or just start with a 30-second ad, IBJ Media can help. Contact advertise at ibj.com to learn more.